Okay, everyone. Well, welcome to our second session for making sense of new technology or learning in new technologies. And this week we're going to be exploring some aspects of systems thinking and understanding various educational systems that we may be involved with. So I've given you a couple of readings, Systems Analysis in Education and Complex Systems in Educational Change towards a New Research Agenda. And there are a few video clips and other activities for you to have a look at, because part of this evening will be to go through some practical activities that you'll be able to use for your first assignment. So before we get started, do we have any questions? Now remember, you can use the chat or you can use your microphones. Looks like we've got a few people still just joining us. And hi, Adrian. Okay, so it doesn't look as though we've got many questions. Okay then. Well, let's then get started and look at the readings. Now, hopefully you've done these this time. Hadis is a little bit confused. How are you confused, Hadis? How can we help? Yes, you should be able to talk if you unmute yourself. I don't think I can do that for you. So on your screen down towards the bottom, you should see a little microphone, a hang up button, and a video button.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
I'm a little bit confused about whatever you told us last week. I'm sorry I was busy because one of my close friends got cancer. He got a tongue cancer. I was busy with him. He did the surgery and this thing. So, but now he's okay. He did the surgery. Now he's at home. So I'm just involved to the class like today, and I go through the last lecture, and I try to realize what should I do each week. But there was so many readings to do, and the quiz and the survey was confused because I don't know how to do how to make the survey. I'm not sure I'm in the right track, so I just a little bit like afraid of everything. I just want to make myself like ready to continue the week schedules and everything, but I'm not sure where should I like find more information, and how should I do that I can like do things faster, because I think I'm a little bit late of everything.
Okay. Generally, the main expectation is that you do the readings before each of these online sessions. And if you come along to the online sessions, this is our opportunity to discuss those readings and explore them in some more depth. But you are required to do the readings independently before the sessions. In terms of the quiz, it's related to the readings and reflects some of the key points from the readings. And you can do that to gain some. There's a 20% assessment based upon some completion activities. So things like doing the readings and summarizing them, watching or participating in the online video conferences and summarizing those, doing the quizzes. These can all give you marks towards that 20% maximum.
I
Now,
was
you don't have to
trying
do them all.
to.
Each of
Sorry.
them gives about 6% or 6.5%. So completing all of 3 of them would give you all of the marks you need to meet that 20% threshold. But there's 5 areas that you can actually explore and gain marks for that aspect.
Okay, got it. I try to like looking at the quiz and then go through the readings, but I couldn't find the questions. There was a quiz and there was some area to like submit the answers, but I didn't know what should I do. If I like go through readings, I will find them. I was like, I couldn't find them.
Okay, in terms of finding the answers to the quiz questions, they will be based upon the readings.
Mhm.
And you do need to read the readings in order to answer the quiz questions. It's
I
probably a
didn't
good
find
idea
the
to do the readings
question.
first.
Sorry. I didn't find like the bottom or anything that I can like find the questions. You know what I mean?
Yes, you won't find the exact wording. Okay, it's based upon your understanding of the
No, no,
readings.
no. I didn't find the questions.
Okay, so you haven't found the actual quiz.
Yes, I didn't find it. I don't know where are they.
Okay, let
I
me
find the
just
like
share my
they.
screen and show you, and then we'll.
Thank you.
Um, Let me just see what I'm looking at here. So for last week, if you look at the course readings for last week, the video
Yeah.
conference, then under that are the different activities that you can complete. The scholarship activity of summarizing the readings, the review activity of summarizing the video conference. Then there's the quiz, where you can answer the quiz questions. And that's the 3 main ones that you can do each week.
I click on the quiz, but I
Okay,
didn't
looks
find the
like it works.
quiz.
You need to put in your name, your
Oh.
email address, and then click next, and then it will bring up the questions for you to answer.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought I need to complete the quiz because it was like something like attachment there. So, oh, thank you.
No, for each of them, you just put in your email address so I know who's actually doing it, and then you can complete the task.
Okay, I got it. I got it. Okay, thank you.
No problems. Okay,
About the Delphi and about the survey, do I need to like just it's depend on the next task. It's
we're
I
going to be
mean,
discussing that in a moment, so we might just hold your questions until I go through what is required for this
okay.
evening, and that'll hopefully answer your questions about the Delphi process, at least for the in-class Delphi. And then it is a practice session for when you do your assignment, which is a more complex Delphi process.
Okay, thank you so much because I was like freaking out because I didn't know what should I do. Thank you. Now I'm much
No
comfortable.
problems.
Thank you.
The other hint is to review the videos from last week, which should hopefully have explained some aspects of the questions that you might have had. But I understand it's all a little bit new whenever you start a new course, and there are always a few things that seem a little bit uncertain on. Okay, so we have 2 readings. I'm not going to ask who's read them, and I'm just going to hope and trust that you have read them this time. And let me share them and we'll discuss them. Okay, so the first reading is on systems analysis and education. Do we have any questions about it? These sessions are not really for me to go through and read out or summarize the readings for you. The idea is that you have done the readings, and in doing so, you've come across some questions that you would like clarified. So does anyone have any questions on the systems analysis and education reading? Okay, so Adrian asks, is this approach mainly quantitative? It's a good question. In the main, yes. If it's taken to its full extent, which leads to a systems model, which is basically a simulation of a situation or an environment, then it would be described as a quantitative approach. That said, however, it can also be used in qualitative research in order to explore the interconnection between ideas and groups and agencies and so forth. So while in its purest form, it would fit within the quantitative area of research, when we make a full system model, such as like a weather model that predicts global warming based upon temperature changes and things of that nature, that would certainly be quantitative. That said, however, we can use it to examine more messy systems such as a school or an educational environment and look at the interaction between different groups within that environment. And that can support a more qualitative study that relies upon other approaches such as interviews and things of that nature to better understand an environment. So systems analysis is really a tool set that can be used to support both approaches. It's not really a methodology in itself. So yes, we can certainly use it for understanding the interactions between groups, and that's the main reason, or the main use you'll use it for in your assignments within an educational organization. And one of the key benefits of systems thinking and systems analysis is it allows us to consider the interactions of other systems. We often have a blinkered view of any organization or environment where we just focus on the elements that we're familiar with and understand, but systems analysis forces us to think about what other systems that we may not be as familiar with may be interacting with that particular system that we are familiar with. So for example, if we were examining a system of a university, we may not consider the wider economic system for the country, but it has a direct impact upon the systems within a university environment. But on a smaller scale, if we're looking at a system of a classroom, we may not consider the system of the local medical environment. So when flus occur and the impact they may have upon the classroom environment. So widening our perspective of teaching and educational systems to include medical systems and how flus can sweep through populations could provide us more insight into the learning process that is impacted by health concerns. Just as one example, but there's many, many others. The key point of systems analysis is to allow us to think more divergently, where other approaches, such as the Delphi approach, is more focused on convergent thinking. And yes, Adrian, the context does matter. It sets the framework, but it also, in systems analysis, we try not to be limited by a context because we want to introduce other contexts that we may not have thought about and how they might interact with the primary context that we're more familiar with. Okay, so do we have some other comments or questions about the systems analysis reading? Okay. Okay, so Henry asks, I reckon that what the OECD has been doing with the PISA test. No, absolutely. And the whole issue around testing has involved many different systems. One of the biggest concerns about the testing regime in schools has been the use of the test results by other systems other than education. In particular, it's been used or wanted to be used as a way of measuring the effectiveness and employability of teachers. And that whole approach to the use of those testing results was quite different to how they were originally conceived within an educational system, which was looking more at how to maximize the learning outcomes of students within that system. So that's another example where looking at how other systems, political systems and economic systems, can often play a significant factor in more traditional systems such as an educational system. Other comments or questions? Remember, this is how we run these sessions. You ask questions, I provide you with some commentary on those, but you can also answer each other's questions and we can start having a nice dialogue about the issues raised in these readings. So Henry comments that Singapore is a great example. Yes, Singapore is a very interesting ecosystem for lots of different innovations. Singapore is very, very proactive in introducing new innovative approaches, particularly in education. What they tend to be not very good at is embedding those innovations in the long term. They tend to go looking for the next innovation rather than exploring how the innovations that they've explored can be fully embedded within their systems. But they certainly are very proactive in exploring new approaches. Adrian mentions, back to his question, there can be external variables which affect the education system. Absolutely, but we want to go just beyond variables. We want to look at the systems involved with those variables. In systems analysis, we talk about stock and flow and how various issues can change over time and the interactions they have between each other to affect that change. And we're going to look at a couple of models where we can explore the various systems and the interactions between elements of those systems. Hopefully some of you would have got down to those readings and examples past the videos when you did your preparation for this week. Okay, Kathleen asks, I found it interesting that given the discussion of using data from standardized testing in NAPLAN today. The paper is 60 years old and we are still discussing the validity of using this data for decision making in schooling. Yes, the whole issue around the use of data is complex. In the main, from an academic perspective, we love collecting data and analyzing that and exploring the implications of what the data shows us through research processes. What's a little bit more problematic is the use of data or the collection and use of data in a much more ad hoc way in education at the moment, where there is not, in the main, comprehensive analysis of that data, and so it can be open to misinterpretation and also misuse by various groups that have particular agendas. The media is certainly one of those. They love to sensationalize data, and they don't tend to look at it particularly effectively as an overall data set. They pick out the most sensational elements and highlight those to develop news stories. But they're not alone in doing that. So do some leaders in education and in politics. So we need to be careful about collecting data in terms of how it's then subsequently analyzed and used. Analyzed effectively, it can be very, very powerful. If it's not done properly, it can be somewhat dangerous. Now, Henry mentions, Adrian, I think that when there are budget cuts to schools, then there is an effect on things like investing in new equipment. If the teachers have a terrible health system, teachers will not go to work, which affects the system too. Now, absolutely, and how they all interact can be quite interesting. But it's not just health systems. For example, at university, the transport system can play a big factor in the effectiveness of students' learning. If you can't find a park, then you can't go to lectures and you can't learn. So that's something that most people wouldn't think too much about in terms of interactions between education and transport networks. But from a student's perspective and a practical perspective, it can be quite significant. Adrian mentions data tells us one part of the story only in a macro view. Absolutely, data can tell us many stories, and we do have to be careful how we analyze that data. And ideally, it's subject to a proper research methodology and process so that we can make some really informed decisions about the meaning that is drawn out of that data. It's when we just collect lots of data and apply a whole lot of other ad hoc measures to that data and try to draw inferences from it that people can get in trouble, particularly if they don't have a research background and experience in analyzing data to draw out conclusions. Kathleen mentions, yes, poor literacy results mean changes to literacy teaching in schools without enough thought. And yes, unfortunately, there's some ongoing political agendas that are commonly gathering data sets. The literacy debates between phonics and whole language learning is one. The history debates around what we should learn in schools regarding national history is another big problematic area that often gets conflated with political decision making. But there's also issues, mathematics learning often becomes a major problem area when new approaches to mathematics education are introduced. And then we have a whole lot of other groups wanting to have an opinion and say over the processes involved in education. So a lot of systems analysis and thinking is about understanding all of these interactions. And in particular, when you go on to do your implementation plan for your second assignment, you'll be using systems analysis to try to understand all of the different actors involved in your organization that you're going to be developing a plan for, and how they all have some influence and stake in what occurs in your changes that you're going to try to implement. And understanding the systems involved in that can greatly influence whether or not the proposed changes that you want to see occur will successfully occur in an organization. Now, does anyone have any specific questions from the RAND study? This is quite an old study. It was done 1959, but it was really the paper that started systems analysis off. Remember, you can speak using your microphones. Okay, so it looks as though there's no questions about this particular paper. Let's move on then to the Lemke paper. This is a bit more modern, 2008. And this looks specifically at how we can use systems analysis in educational research. Do we have any questions, statements, comments?
I would like to mention something really interesting that I found. That is that on the page 127, they say something about how it is very difficult to understand the system when you are inside the system. I think that's one of the complications. Sometimes you cannot see all what's connected to the system because you are like embedded in it. So
Now,
in this case, research, how can it, they say it's an externalist and instrumental view. So how can you do that? How can you actually get to the point where you can see the system as a whole?
that is one of the actual strengths of systems analysis and the connection circle approach that we'll be looking at in a little bit, because it forces you to actually to consider what other systems might be involved and what those systems comprise. Um, the biggest problem we have is that we don't think about what other systems might interact with let's stick to education as our primary system, what other factors might impact upon education. Of course, we're so caught up with the educational processes that are quite complex in themselves that we don't tend to think about these other systems. But the point of systems thinking and systems analysis is to get us to actually consider what other systems are interacting and how they might impact upon the educational system as we know it. But you're completely correct, and it is a problem of ethnographic studies in particular, where we get so caught up with the assumed knowledge of a system that we don't start to look outside of it. But many of the most significant research findings occur when we actually look at the interaction between systems, where most people haven't thought about, say, for example, how the healthcare system might impact upon the education system. Or there's hundreds of other systems, but very few people actually consider those and explore the interactions. And that's part of why we include this as part of this course, so that you get used to looking at what other factors can influence education, because they may be the key factors that underpin what you're trying to understand. Because generally, we've got a fairly good understanding of our internal systems in education. We know about them, we study them all the time, but when we have things go wrong, we look for the problem and the solution within those internal systems, neglecting that there may be external factors that are causing that. And in the video clips, the cautionary tale of cats in Borneo is a good example of that, where they were trying to solve a problem and they introduced DDT to remove some bugs to improve their crop yields, but the DDT accumulated in the rats, and all the cats died, but the rats then became a problem and was a greater problem than the original problem that was attempting to be solved, because they were originally just looking at the problem in terms of a chemical solution to improving crop yields and reducing pests. They didn't think about the other ecological systems that might rely upon those pests. So hopefully you've had a look at that video clip, and that's another salient example of where an understanding of systems helps us understand the overall possible causes of different issues and problems within our area of study. And yes, you can always hire a consultant or researcher to help you, but it doesn't take an awful lot of skill to apply systems thinking. And it's an area that we're now teaching in schools all the way down to the earliest years of primary school, to help them better understand the problem-solving process and to develop solutions to problems that they might otherwise not have thought about.
So I guess that's why we have to be careful with that. Our logical thinking tends to be causal. So it's like cause and effect. But when you look at the system, usually there's something else, and sometimes it's not a direct effect of something you were expecting. So you have to to trace back and go over. That's why I think that the loops are, or that's how I understood the loops.
Yes, and in particular, there's a diagram that helps highlight that. Let me just bring that up on the screen for you. This one here about event-orientated thinking, where we look at various factors that might be causing something to occur, and we try to understand those and make changes to them so that the desired outcome occurs. Systems thinking takes a very different approach, where we look at all the interactions between lots of factors and how they can impact upon each other, and then we can start looking at some of those that we might be able to manipulate to have the desired flow-on effect to the situation that we're exploring. And yes, Connie, it was a malaria problem in the Borneo cat drop solution. And eventually they decided that the best solution to try to reduce the rat population was to simply reintroduce a lot of cats, and they brought those back in. They didn't actually parachute them in, they parachuted crates of cats into the jungles so that they could repopulate the cat problem, or cat population, and reduce the rodent population. Now, a bicycle is another good example to explore systems thinking. We often just think of a bicycle as a transportation system, but it's actually made up of lots of independent systems. It has a braking system, it has a lighting system, it often has a pedal system in terms of gears and efficiency of that. It's got a comfort system in terms of the seating systems and suspension systems. It may have a warning system in terms of the bells and so forth. And then there's other systems that impact upon the use of a bicycle: the road system and the condition of the road, the weather system, the time of day and the cyclical nature of daylight and nighttime. All of these systems can play an influence on how successful a bicycle solution to a problem may be. And there's a little video clip of the use of bicycles in Africa, where they've explored a whole range of other uses of bicycles as a transportation system for schools, as a school bus, or to transport water, or as an ambulance. All things that we may not traditionally think of a bicycle might be able to contribute to, but by thinking outside the box and looking at other systems that can contribute to those systems, we can find new and innovative solutions. So do we have any other questions or comments from the Lemke reading? It does have more of a research focus, but given that you're master's students, we do want to introduce a few research papers each week so that you start engaging at that level. And yes, Adrian, defining the systems is important because that helps us understand them. And in a little bit, we're going to go through a process of creating systems thinking models, and in particular, the use of connection circles. Connection circles can be a very easy and quick way of creating a systems model. And yes, Adrian, there will always be different interpretations. That's part of why we document and explain our models so that other people can understand the interpretation we're making on that system. Any complex system will have a different model produced by different people. If I had each of you create a different systems model for this course, they would all be quite different to the system model that I would create for this course. So we all bring different lenses and perspectives, but that doesn't negate its effectiveness, but it highlights the complexity of the use of any qualitative approach. For scientific system models, eventually we do develop a consensus on the models. So for example, it's taken many years to develop a consensus around our weather and climate models, but there's now consensus on those models, or generally a consensus. and the results of those system models to predict climate change are generally accepted in the scientific community. But it can take quite a while to develop that consensus. And for most small studies that we do in education, we don't tend to try to develop an overall consensus. We simply explain how we've interpreted the environment and the system model that we've developed to understand a particular environment and situation. So there's a few video clips that you can review that explain how to create connection circles, and then from those connection circles develop causal loops. And we then use these causal loops to develop flow maps, which show how things change over time. So for your assignment, you're going to be creating a connection circle. So around a circle, you draw a circle, and around the outside, you put all the different factors that you can think of, and then you start drawing arrows between those factors that show whether or not it's a positive connection or a negative connection. So for example, in this case, we can see that the standard of living can increase the number of cars. The higher the standard of living we have, the more money we have, and the more cars we purchase. The more cars we purchase is a positive impact upon air pollution. We create more air pollution. The more air pollution we produce, the more respiratory disease is produced, and then that has a negative impact upon standard of living. So respiratory disease causes a negative on standard of living. And we've got other things around here, such as the more coal burned increases the air pollution, but the more death rate will reduce the standard of living. So that's another negative. And as our standard of living goes up, it can often also have a negative impact upon environmental regulations, which can then also produce more pollution. Do we have any questions about connection circles? You will need to produce one of these for your assignment. There is the video clip that explains how they're done. And then the causal loop video shows you how you can create these loops within the connections of your connection circle. And these loops are then turned into what are called causal diagrams or flow maps. And so here we can see that orange loop has been turned into a more formal loop here. And it's called a balancing loop because there's actually an odd number of positives and negatives. If there was an even number of positive and negatives, it would be a reinforcing loop. And then there's a tool that you can use called Loopy, where you can make your own causal loops, or flow maps, I should say. Flow maps are made up of causal loops. Do we have some questions on that? Is anyone still there? Oh, good. I always worry you've all gone off to watch TV. Okay, so what you should try is to do some drafts of a causal loop for an organization that you're thinking of exploring. Let me just bring up your assignment sheet to show you where that relates. So here you're going to analyze your selected organization using a system model. So think about a school or a university or an English language program, whatever organization you're thinking of, and you want to develop up a causal map of that organization. Now, the reason we do that is that should help you identify the questions that you want to create your Delphi process to solve or to answer. So, for example, back here, if having done this connection circle, and we've seen these different causal loops, we might start thinking, is there any way of reducing air pollution? If air pollution is one of the main problems that is creating respiratory disease, and it's coming from cars, so we may have to look at cars, but there's also some other factors that are causing air pollution. But if we can do something about air pollution, then that may be a way of addressing the problem of respiratory disease. So you may then, in your survey, provide your participants with a range of different possibilities for reducing air pollution. So it might be to ban cars or to encourage use of bicycles and walking. It might be to plant more trees or introduce regulations that reduce the use of cars between certain times, or to increase taxes on petrol. There can be a whole lot of possible solutions to reducing air pollution. Many countries have implemented some of these, particularly countries that are particularly polluted. So you can do a bit of research and find out, in this case, some things to ask. And then you would ask those, or provide those options to your experts, and they would vote on them using the process that we're using. And you would then have a ranked list of options, and the top one would be the one that your experts have given a consensus on as being the most likely approach that we should use to reduce air pollution. So that's the link between creating a connection circle and these causal loops and the Delphi questions that you're going to create for your survey. Now, most of you will be doing some form of educational environment, so you need to look at all the factors impacting upon that educational environment. Don't go overboard. Don't go beyond more than 20 or so. And I would generally expect about a dozen factors that you put around your circle and look at the interactions between them. But you do need to have enough of them that you start forming these connection circles. Okay, the arrows have to form a loop where they follow one another. And you can use that then to create your causal loop diagrams. And then using tools such as Loopy, create some flow maps. Any questions? Okay, you will find more detail about the loops in the video clips that I've provided on how to actually generate the loops. How many points should we narrow down to? Generally, I would probably suggest if you identify 3 loops that have some relationship to each other, that would give you a fairly good insight into the problems in your organization that you want to then develop up some questions for your experts to rank. If you're having trouble coming up with your questions, then you may want to expand and develop more loops. But these are all tools to help you identify the problem that you're exploring and the questions that you're going to ask your experts. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure the recording is still going on.